Well, hi everyone, and welcome to ArtsFest Online and to our next HoPIN webinar featuring the Barber Institute. Presentations from Robert Wenley, Deputy Director of Collections and Research, Helen Cobby, Assistant Curator, Chloe Church, Art Fund National Curatorial Trainee, and Kirsty Clarke, Student Engagement Coordinator, all from the Barber Institute. Our chair this evening is David Osbaldestin, course leader for art and design at Birmingham City University. If you have any questions for our speakers, please use the Q&A box or the chat and we'll go through them at the end of the presentations. As we are recording the session, we do ask that you not share any sensitive or confidential information. So welcome everyone, and over to you, David.
Good evening everybody, and welcome to this evening's special HoPIN event. I'd just like to start this evening with a huge thank you to John Hinks, who is the founder of the HoPIN network, who has the rare occasion of having a night off tonight, and he's with us as one of the audience, one of the attendees this evening. It is a very special event this evening where we're focusing on the collections from the Barber. So in terms of how the event is planned, we will be introducing our speakers one by one, and then we will all come together as a panel at the end to take questions. But as Claire has already mentioned, if you could please ask your questions as we go through the Q&A or through the chat facility, and I will ask those questions for you at the end to the panel. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker of the evening. And it is my pleasure to introduce Robert Wenley, who is the Deputy Director of Collections and Research at Barber. And Robert will be talking to us this evening about the history and highlights of the Barber Institute's print collection. So good evening, Robert.
Good evening, David, and thank you very much to the HoPIN committee and to John in particular for providing us with this very welcome opportunity to sorry, my slides slightly out of order, to discuss the Barber's small but rich print collection. So this collection is kept in our purpose-built prints and drawings study room, which you can see here, purpose-built, as I said, in 2009. And the works from the collection are presented in regularly changing thematic displays in our two print bays. And this is one of those print bays with a display in situ. So I'm going to kick off with a general introduction to the history and some of the highlights of this part of the Barber's collection before handing on to my colleagues for some case studies. So the Barber Institute was founded in 1932 by Lady Barber, widow of Sir Henry Barber, a highly successful property developer in the city of Birmingham. They had no children, but she perpetuated the family name and crowned existing links with the university by using the bulk of the family fortune to create the institute we see today within the campus grounds at the university. At the same time, she set up the Henry Barber Trust to oversee the ongoing investments and expenditure of that Barber fortune. The institute's purpose was, as she put it, for the study and encouragement of art and music. It's sometimes assumed that the institute's celebrated fine art collections were founded on Sir Henry and Lady Barber's own collection, but this is not really the case. Lady Barber had a serious interest in lace and textiles, but otherwise neither she nor her husband could be deemed to be a collector. Furthermore, she died in 1933, leaving some guidance as to what should be acquired, but no fine art collection as such. Key requirements that she made included that work should date no later than 1900 and be, quote, of that quality required by the National Gallery or the Wallace Collection, unquote. But it was and remains a key role of the Trust to interpret her wishes. So what we now see in the Barber Institute has been accumulated over the past 90 years or so by the Henry Barber Trust, which owns the entire collection, on the advice of successive art historian directors. The Trust now allocates a discrete annual fund to the director for smaller scale acquisitions, which she or he can make without reference to the trustees. And these typically will include relatively low cost items like many of the prints in the collection. The first director was Thomas Bodkin, seen here on the right, appointed in 1935, who made the Barber's initial purchases even before the building was opened by Queen Mary in July 1939. It was Bodkin, director until 1952, who established in general terms the range and quality of the Institute's holdings. The focus then and subsequently was on art of the Western European tradition, and indeed exclusively so within the print collection. The first prints arrived in a bunch from the London dealers Carnegie and John Grant in early 1939, so just before the building opened. The 17 works purchased then included woodcuts by Dürer and etchings by Rembrandt, for example, the one on the left, also Goya and Whistler, some of the most illustrious names in European printmaking, and all artists by whom further examples would be acquired in future years. These initial purchases also featured reproductive engravings after paintings by Turner and Watteau, such as the example on the right, the latter perhaps a nod to the predominantly 18th century French character of the Wallace collection, one of Lady Barber's models. Collecting of prints continued only sporadically thereafter under Bodkin, and it was two of his successors, Professors Ellis Waterhouse in particular on the left, and also the late Richard Verdi, who did most to develop the collection, which now numbers more than 400 examples. In fact, the total is nearer 500 if one counts individual prints in bound folios, such as these examples by John Hamilton Mortimer and Francesco Finelli in the collection. I should also mention here that the Barber has 4 finely printed books, something that Lady Barber said should be acquired for the Institute in its collection, 2 German treatises from the 1490s, one shown on the left, and a first edition of Vitruvius's De Architectura from 1521 on the right, all with multiple woodcut illustrations. And there is also this unillustrated 1894 printing by William Morris's Kelmscott Press of the Book of Wisdom and Lies by Orbeliani, which you can see here. These are all early purchases, and we now leave such things to the university's Cadbury Research Library for early books of this sort. Since 1967, the Trust has admitted post-1900 items, so long as they were made at least 30 years before date of acquisition. And more recently, the Trust has also been willing to accept gifts if deemed of suitable quality, so they have to match up to the standards of what's here already. Indeed, among the most recent arrivals was this woodblock print by William Nicholson of his friend James Pride, part of a generous gift made last year of prints from the collection of the Right Reverend Mark Santa, formerly Bishop of Birmingham. As with the paintings collection, the prints collection at the Barber aspires to cover all the main schools, periods, techniques, styles, and key exponents of the Western tradition. Within those parameters, it's pretty well balanced with no huge gaps or large groups by an individual artist, though there are some areas of greater strength, while our holdings of 20th century prints and of women artists are still relatively weak. The earliest prints in the collection, woodcuts by Dürer and this engraving on the right by Cristofano Robetta, date from around 1500, at the dawn of fine art print production, when works began to be made specifically for a collector's market. Those shown here reflect 2 of the most passionately debated concerns of the time, religious fervour and the classical Renaissance. Our most recent work by date is this work on the left by Elizabeth Frink, an etching and aquatint from 1972, indeed her interpretation of an infamously bawdy scene from Chaucer's The Miller's Tale. This was another work in the Santa gift last year. In a bit of a bumper year, we also received this fine Cézanne print on the right as part of a small bequest from the distinguished London dealer Carsten Schubert. At the heart of the collection are examples of woodcuts, engravings, and etchings by the acknowledged masters of these media, including Albrecht Dürer, as seen here, Rembrandt, 2 fine examples here, Goya, both early works such as these 2, and also some of his later etchings, and finally James McNeill Whistler. all 4 artists represented by multiple and varied examples of their printmaking. Other strengths in numbers include 16th and 17th century Italian prints with religious subjects, which Chloe will address in a few minutes, such as this example of the Feast of Corpus Christi. Also Dutch and Flemish early 17th century landscape prints, which is in fact also the subject of another display currently at the Barber, which I'll urge you to come and see. And then there's a very strong group of French prints from throughout the 19th century, both early and late, very much matching the strength and indeed the breadth of the paintings collection in the Barber in this area as well, for which it's so well known. But arguably the most remarkable and distinctive group of prints at the Barber are the 15 or so early 20th century German expressionist works. This is a collection in its own right, initiated and largely assembled by the late Richard Verdi in the 1990s and early 2000s, partly in lieu of paintings by these artists, which would have been and remain impossibly expensive, certainly in any number. These include highly emotive and quasi-primitive woodcuts, such as the 2 here by Corinth and Nolde, delicate drawing-like dry points, such as the Crouching Woman on the left by Egon Schiele, and the fascinating George Gross Querschnitt Plantin & Co. on the right, which was a fairly recent acquisition, and also some fabulous etchings, examples here by Kati Kollwitz and Otto Dix. So wonderful works by some of the leading, I think probably covering most of the leading figures of the German Expressionist movement. Almost as remarkable, but perhaps somewhat less known as a group in the Barber's holdings is a group of about a dozen or so German Romantic prints and also some drawings at the Barber, ranging in date from the mid-18th century to the late 19th century. These are quite diverse, but they share a general sense of yearning for the unattainable or the lost, and they make a wonderful group actually together. And this particular example by Glaube dates from the mid-18th century. And there's another German Romantic print here by Zwecker, an illustrator, which is a depiction of a scene in a Heinrich Heine poem. So that's rather wonderful. And then one of the people's favorite works in the collection is this Arthur Illies print of a ripe cornfield at evening. A particular type of etching à la poupée with this wonderfully evocative scene. So that's some of the highlights of the collection. And I'd just like to finish with a taste of the wider holdings of 20th century prints at the Barber, which is really the fastest growing section today, but perhaps also the one where there are the greatest gaps and the most need to make some acquisitions. Following our major purchase of a painting by this artist in 2015, we bought a print by the New York Ashcan School painter and printmaker George Bellows in 2016, which you can see here, his image of the life class. And partly on the back of this burgeoning interest in early 20th century American art, we were then gifted, very fortunately, a set of 10 etchings by Bellows's near contemporary New York John Sloan, from a substantial holding of his prints given by the artist's widow to Delaware Art Museum for the particular purpose of disseminating 2 public collections so as to raise this artist's profile. So that was a nice addition. In 2016, we were also fortunate to be bequeathed a number of theatre-related prints from a private collector in the UK through the Art Fund, of which the pick was this striking Nevinson lithograph, joining another work we already had by the artist, which we'd recently acquired. And then just to finish off quickly, there are fascinating works by Gill and Miro, by Picasso and Matisse, by Kupka, the Czech artist, and Max Ernst on the right. And finally, Kurt Schwitters and Graham Sutherland to represent the more abstract end of art, which again have been relatively recent acquisitions, naturally enough, given their date. In fact, all of these works, apart from the Gill, were acquired by Richard Verdi, who I think really had the foresight to see how, and the knowledge and appreciation of printmaking, to understand where the gaps were and where to progress the collection. And this group of 20th century works represents something of the diversity of mid-20th century European printmaking in style, technique, and subject matter. But as the opportunities unroll to acquire prints from the 1980s and early 1990s, remembering our 30-year rule, the challenge of developing a truly diverse and representative collection, whatever that might or should mean, is both daunting and exciting. So thank you very much. And I'd now like to hand over to my colleague, or to David, who'll introduce my colleague, Helen Cobby, our next speaker.
Thank you very much, Robert. Fantastic collection that you have at Barber. So our second speaker this evening is Helen Cobby, and Helen is the assistant curator at the Barber Institute. Her role includes caring for the prints and drawings collection, curating and organising the print bay displays, and researching and providing access to the collection. This evening, Helen will be speaking to us about the printed word, image, text, and meaning in European prints. Good evening, Helen.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, David. I'll start sharing my screen. Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for having us. It's great to be part of this event and help showcase the Barber and the collections. I'm briefly going to look at the physical spaces of the Barber's print bay displays, the types of displays that we've put on there, and then focus on one of the exhibits I curated a few years ago now that explores ideas around the printed word. The print bay displays often vary widely in content, subject matter, and style, reflecting the Barber's works on paper collection, as we've heard from Robert. Sometimes they are in dialogue with or provide contrast to the main exhibitions at the Barber, of which there are 3 a year. The physical display spaces are quite small and unique. They're purpose-built, like the rest of the Barber building. And we have 2 of them at the gallery, and within each one there's 11 bays for works grouped into clusters of 3s broken up by 2 oblique and slightly larger spaces for individual prints, as you can hopefully see in some of the images here. These exhibition spaces are set off from 2 of the permanent galleries, where the layout is also structured around bays, and this can present challenges for displaying works, but also many benefits, such as allowing more works to be displayed compared to if we were hanging them along one straight wall, for example. The bay formation also helps establish clearly defined groupings of works that can help encourage close looking and hopefully interesting connections between individual works in both manageable and meaningful ways. In the print bay areas, we normally display 11 works and select thematic displays mostly that help to display otherwise hidden parts of the collection to the public. And we can see that there's several different snapshots from different displays here, some of which I've curated and others by some of our paid collections interns, where we have 1 or 2 of them normally a year. And then on this second slide, there's a couple of images, reference images that I took when I was researching for one of the displays that I'm going to briefly talk about now, called The Printed Word, which was actually on display in 2019, so the time has really flown. This thematic display explored various ways in which text is used to provide meaning and content to historic visual images in the print medium. It considered the role of literary references in historical images, creative and calligraphic text, the significance of text used in prints made after paintings, the relationship between portraits and inscriptions, and the use of text as an integral element of a composition. I enjoyed focusing on some of the more unusual and particularly creative examples in the Barber's collection for this. And for me, it was quite a different way of looking at prints and helped to guide a greater focus, I think, on the materiality of the medium and the collaborative physical nature of the printing process. The display drew on numerous forms of printed material, including those designs for periodicals and posters, and concentrated on works made between the 16th and the 20th centuries by or after a diverse selection of artists. And several of these artists, including Samuel Palmer, were also writers, while others made portraits of writers. And drawing out these different layers helped to explore the variety and intensity of the relationships between the word and image, even in such a small display, while providing useful snapshots for visitors into the wider content text into which these prints were made. So the image that we have here by Palmer, the vine that was on in this display. Poetry by Blake, Milton, Shakespeare were some of the primary sources for inspiration for Palmer's art. And this print here includes a verse, which is very difficult to make out, I think, on the slide, from Shakespeare's tragedy, Antony and Cleopatra, surrounded by two small images. And the top depicts Bacchus, the Roman god of agriculture and wine, leaping from his chariot to meet his followers. And hopefully in the second slide, you can see the text slightly better. You can see it's faded in comparison to the image, suggesting different inks were used. And the text also would have been printed second around the images that Palmer submitted to an organisation called the Etching Club, which contributed to elevating the status of etching in British art. And this was a club that often devised projects using both text and image together in a variety of different and very creative ways. And then a huge contrast here was another work that made its way into the display. And this image by Giulio Bonassoni, made in 1563. We can see Cupid as being punished for meddling with the amorous feelings of others around him. And we see the poem on the cartouche in the bottom left here states that his mother Venus is seeking revenge for the relationship that he contrived between her and Mars. And interestingly, this work was made before the custom of positioning verses beneath prints spread to Italy in the 1580s. And the inclusion of text suggests the intended audience was perhaps not familiar with the iconography here. Although writing short verses to accompany or comment on artworks does go back to classical antiquity and was an accomplishment often expected of educated classes. And the print is also inscribed with the claim that the composition is the artist's own inventions. There's several different layers here that the text is helping to create. And then in this next slide, we can see one of Hendrik Hout's engravings after the paintings that established his reputation as a superb printmaker. And at the bottom here, we see the unattributed religious Latin text is the artist's own edition, and it plays a significant pictorial, not just a didactic role within this work. And the lettering is particularly and unusually fine, as the artist was also a calligrapher who engraved some of the finest inscriptions on Dutch prints in the early 17th century. Engraved calligraphy in the Netherlands came out of a workshop tradition whose lettering techniques had roots in map making. It was also linked to diamond engraving on glass, for example, to decorate drinking vessels. And the Dutch were leading masters of this technique by the mid-17th century. And then lastly, one of the other works in this display was this one here, which is probably the only surviving print with this particular inscription after Poussin's painting, Tancred and Emilia, made in about 1634. You can just briefly see on the next slide, which is itself part of the Barber's collection and on display in one of our permanent galleries. So the artist Sir James Thornhill, a previous owner of the painting, we think probably commissioned the engraving from Van der Hout from whom he had family connections and contacts. And we can see at the bottom that it's dedicated to the 4th Earl of Chesterfield, a politician and patron of literature. And on the left, we can clearly see that Poussin is stated as the painter of the original painting. And after the oil was purchased for the Barber, the young art historian Anthony Blunt questioned the attribution to Poussin. However, this print with its text is evidence of the artist's authorship, and such an aid to attribution is a potential significance of such texts and of prints after painting more generally. So it was great to be able to show such a strong example of that in this display. And I'll leave it there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Helen. Really fascinating insight into some more of the detailed aspects of the collection. Our third speaker this evening is Chloe Church. Chloe is one of the National Gallery Curatorial trainees who is currently researching and reinterpreting the pre-16th century Italian paintings at the Barber Institute. Chloe's talk this evening is the representation of Christ's divinity in 2 early modern Italian printed images. Good evening, Chloe.
Good evening, David. Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen.
Excellent. Just while you're sharing screen, Chloe, could I remind everyone, please feel free to ask questions in the chat or using the Q&A.
Great. Hi, everyone. Just to give you a bit of context as to my talk. So as David mentioned, then I am one of the National Gallery Curatorial trainees. And that programme is sponsored by Art Fund. And basically, it involves a 6-month training period at the National Gallery, and then 16 months kind of applying that training at one of the National Gallery's partner institutions. So my project at the Barber is to research and reinterpret the pre-1600 Italian paintings. And an aspect of that project is to develop a print bay display. And in giving a bit of context on the Green Gallery, which is where we hold the Renaissance paintings, the pre-1600 Italian paintings, then this is a few snapshots of the wonderful paintings we have in the Green Gallery. And the print bay that this display relates to is just off of the Green Gallery. So it's kind of a continuation of the space. And so the theme of the print bay display that I've developed is storytelling a life of Christ on paper. So due to the large amount of religious subjects that are in the Green Gallery, there's about 2/3 of the paintings, so roughly 25 to 30 objects, I'd say, are related to Christian subject matters. So in light of that, I wanted to enable our visitors to have a bit of a broader sense of the life of Christ. So the display, not to give you too many spoilers, but the display represents the chronology of Christ's life in the printed image. So I'm going to highlight just a couple of the works, and then you'll have to come to the Barber and see the whole display. It's on until September. But 2 works that I wanted to highlight to you, very amazingly and uniquely, we actually have 2 works by 2 brothers of the same subject. So these works are by Giovanni Benedetto Castiglione and his brother Salvatore Castiglione. Both of these artists can be considered Italian Baroque artists, and it is phenomenal that we do have these 2 brothers who have depicted the same subject. The subject matter is the raising of Lazarus, and the raising of Lazarus is found in the Gospel of John. It's a biblical narrative in which Jesus resurrects, raises to life his good friend Lazarus, who's been dead for 4 days. So this is the scene that both brothers have depicted. And we're going to start off with Giovanni Benedetto Castiglione, GB for short, why not? And in terms of this artist, we know a lot more about this artist. Here are a couple of his paintings. So as you can see, they are very Baroque in style. They are hugely expressive, dramatic. There's lots of figures, there's lots of action going on. But as a person, he wasn't so nice. So the Royal Collection exhibited some of his works on paper a few years ago, I believe, and might have been several years ago. And on the artist, then the RC wrote, he was a violent and impetuous man who was repeatedly in court for assault, allegedly attempted to throw his sister off a roof and was forced to leave Rome, probably after committing murder. So this chap, he was not a nice person, but boy, could he etch. So here we have the etching, the raising of Lazarus, and it's a nocturnal scene. So the scene is taking place at night. This kind of isn't a detail in the biblical story. However, it's entirely appropriate with what was going on at the time. So in terms of other representations of the raising of Lazarus, I've thrown together a couple of examples. So in the High Renaissance, then the colours were exceptionally vivid. The scene of the raising of Lazarus in this painting here on the left by Sebastiano del Piombo happened in the day. It's a very bright, vivid scene. However, as the 16th century went on, then we have artists like Caravaggio at the turn of the 17th century who started representing these sort of biblical narratives at night. So we have this very different interpretation from a vivid High Renaissance interpretation, moving into these dark, rich tones, which are found in Caravaggio and then in Rembrandt and Jan Levens. So this shift into kind of representing this biblical narrative at night was entirely in keeping and suitable for the medium of etching. So as etching is monochromatic, then the nocturnal setting for the raising of Lazarus, it feels very appropriate. So GB Castiglione, so Giovanni Benedetto, he was very much inspired by the work of Rembrandt, particularly in his use of tenebrism, so the emphasis on a dark scene highlighted with these very sharp and staccato use of light. So he has etched a work really of two halves. So here we have the left-hand side, and this scene is just packed. There's a lot going on. At the bottom in the center, you can see Lazarus, who is beginning to be resurrected. It's almost like there's a bit of a zombie vibe going on here. His arms are lifting up. He is coming back to life. And you can see the spectators are all leaning in. One of them has a torch just on the right-hand side. You can see that the absence of ink is kind of inferring this idea of a torch. And so Lazarus has begun to be resurrected, and there's a couple of little bits of light. There's from the torch. There's also a slight aura around Lazarus's arms in particular. And on the right, then Christ is standing alone. He has this nimbus around his head, but he's very much isolated from the rest of the crowd. And very interestingly, and actually by accident, this pose that Christ's in, the figure, it relates to another representation of Christ that is actually in the display at the Barber, this time by Giuseppe Rosigliani. And you can see the very similar way in which Christ is depicted. So on the right is Rosigliani's interpretation of Christ curing the men with leprosy. And you can see that almost Christ is represented in exactly the same way. And this is kind of maybe his standard, this is me performing a miracle. This is Jesus performing a miracle. That is the emphasis of the figure and the pose that he is striking. And these two actually do sit next to each other in the display. So there's a lovely little link there. So moving on to GB's brother, Salvatore. Salvatore is a little known artist. There's not much information on him, but it is likely that he apprenticed with his brother, who was slightly older than him. And his etching is quite a bit smaller than Giovanni Benedetto's. It's around half the height and 2/3 of the width. So it is that bit smaller and more intimate. So it really does invite close looking. And this is really a fascinating composition. There is a real similarity in the representation of Lazarus as with Rembrandt. So I've pulled together a couple of Rembrandt's interpretations. Bottom left is the interpretation, the etching that Rembrandt did of the raising of Lazarus, and on the right is the painting. And you can see at the top how Salvatore has kind of interpreted that and adopted a little bit of that style and that motif. It almost looks like Lazarus is levitating out of the tomb. So again, looking at the different sides of the etching, the group on the left, so this same idea of spectators, some are recoiling, some are looking really close, some are recoiling, and particularly in the back row there seems to be people who are really shocked. And I love this detail because in the Bible passage it actually describes how there was a strong odor coming out of the tomb because the body had been decaying for 4 days. So this idea of people recoiling at the stench, I just think is an amazing detail. So on this side, then we have the people who are interacting and engaging with what is going on in front with the resurrection of Lazarus. Again, Christ is represented on his own. He stands and he looks heavenwards. And the detail that I just want to highlight as I round up is this idea of negative space, the negative space around the figure of Christ. It's almost like these ink-free areas are an insinuation of Christ's divinity and his holiness. I find this really interesting. It's almost like two ends of a magnet. No, sorry, the same ends of a magnet hitting each other and almost repelling. It's like the ink is being repelled away from the figure of Christ and his holiness and divinity, him being untouchable. So it communicates the holiness of Jesus, but it also reminds me a little bit of iconography around, for example, the transfiguration or the ascension of Christ. For example, this is an etching after Raphael's transfiguration. And again, that orb around Jesus, that idea of a nimbus, which is completely ink-free, relates to his holiness. So in both cases, these brothers have used rays of light to almost generate a linear perspective, which draws you into the figure itself. So while the other people in the scene, the spectators, are preoccupied, they don't look at Jesus, then we as the viewer are given the opportunity to see Christ as he performs these miracles. And in the case of Salvatore on the right, even though he is younger and a less known artist, I think his work is slightly more successful in communicating the real biblical narrative of the raising of Lazarus, in that it is a precursor to Christ's own resurrection. In the biblical story, then Lazarus's resurrection is this precursor for Christ. And Salvatore has successfully, I think, shown this. Christ is standing on top of the tomb. It's almost like he has dominion over the grave. And the way he is gesturing, he's looking up heavenwards, and it's almost like he is reveling and celebrating his own glory. So Salvatore has really exaggerated the nimbus, the rays of holiness around Christ's whole body. It's very exaggerated. Whereas Giovanni Benedetto has created it more as Christ performing a miracle, and we saw that it actually relates to other figures of Christ, other representations of Christ where he is performing a miracle, like in Rosigliani's. Then Salvatore is doing something slightly different, and it actually causes us to focus a bit more on the figure of Christ and what the resurrection of Lazarus meant in terms of who Jesus was. So in summary, these two works are just fascinating. There's so much more I could say about them, but I'd really encourage you to come and visit the Barber and see the display. And also, just a little plug, I'm doing an introduction talk to this display on the 14th of June at 1 p.m. if anyone is interested. Thank you very much. I'll hand back over to David.
Thank you very much, Chloe. As you say, they're fascinating prints, aren't they? I'd really like to get into this as well when we come to Q&A on the panel. So the display is running until September, is that correct?
Yes, until September. And then there's a talk on the 14th of June at 1 p.m.
Wonderful. Okay, thank you very much. And our final speaker of the evening is Kirsty Clarke. Kirsty is the Student Engagement Coordinator at the Barber Institute, where she programs creative workshops and events, often with local contemporary artists, that introduce new and existing students to the Barber. Kirsty is also an artist who's based in Birmingham. This evening, Kirsty will be talking to us about a learning and engagement perspective. Good evening, Kirsty.
Hello, hi everyone. Wow, the amazing introductions to the Barber's print collection. I feel very sad that I'm going last. No pressure at all. So I'm just going to open and share screen. Just do this. Perfect. Hopefully you can all see that. So I've already been introduced, as I said. As I said, I'm Kirsty Clarke. I'm the Student Engagement Coordinator at the Barber, and I'm really excited to give you a bit of an introduction to the sorts of projects and events that we've been delivering at the Barber to engage students with our print collection. But first, I just want to cover who learning and engagement are and what we sort of do. So the learning and engagement team develop and deliver a public programme for a range of ages and demographics, from children to people in retirement villages. Our biggest aim is to engage with people who rarely, if ever, access galleries or museums and feel these spaces aren't for them, to try and break down the physical, social or psychological barriers preventing them from visiting. We try and offer a diverse assortment of workshops, talks and events for visitors, such as creative writing, drawing, interpretive dance, clay workshop and film screenings, to offer a range of avenues for audiences to connect with our outstanding collection, which you've seen, as I said, already today. Amazing. We work collaboratively with local artists and creatives to plan, develop and deliver these workshops and events. We believe it's important to work with practicing artists to help bridge the gap between the historical works and contemporary practices and current day experience. It's also really powerful and rewarding to connect and introduce audiences to the thriving and exciting Birmingham art scene. A taster of previous student workshops that we've run engaging with the Barber's print collection include a horror writing workshop with local writer Adrian B. Earle, inspired by our ghoulish Goya prints, etchings that you have seen some already. We have quite a number of them we're quite lucky for, so definitely worth a visit to see them. I love Goya. And meditative and calming drawing workshop celebrating light in the darkness during COVID, inspired by Picasso's etching of Jacqueline, which you'll see there, I think on your left. And a protest poetry writing workshop with Bethany Slynn, poet, inspired by the eye-catching and evocative Miro Help Spain print. But most importantly, the Barber Print Club, a monthly hands-on printmaking workshop where students join artist Laura Onions to roll, stain, press and get messy. Laura guides students through the skills needed to create beautiful artworks inspired by the Barber's collection. Students have learnt lino, dry point etching, mono, painterly mono and collagraph, to name a few. We first got the inspiration to set up Barber Print Club off the back of two successful previous print workshops for International Women's Day last year. The first one being The Dangerous Novel, a print workshop inspired by the then new acquisition, The Reader by Marguerite Gerard, where students made work reflecting on the fear-mongering around women reading novels in the 17 and 1800s and the derogatory contemporary term chick lit. We also did another workshop called Dirty Practice, where students took gendered domestic imagery found around the Barber's collection and subverted it to create their own protest artworks. Why printmaking for International Women's Day? Since the formation of the Women's Print Society in 1876, which printed many of the suffragettes' pamphlets, printmaking has been a radical and accessible creative technique for women and oppressed communities to question power and overthrow the status quo. So it seemed perfect. These workshops booked quickly, showing an eagerness to learn the practical skills of printmaking and engage with our print collection. The sessions were energizing and exciting, so setting up Barber Print Club was a no-brainer. And this was proven by a student saying, I attended the International Women's Day print workshops last year and was excited to see Print Club on the website. I had to book on. Since then, we've explored the Barber's print collection as inspiration to teach and explore printmaking techniques. However, the traditional emphasis of replication is downplayed, instead encouraging personal creativity with students creating one-off or small-run prints. This focus is to help empower students to experiment, play, offering respite from study and exams, and to show the role creativity can take in mental well-being. Introducing a range of print techniques and approaches has offered students a physical insight into the collection, allowing them to enter a material dialogue and learn a new way of reading printed works. Here are 3 of the works that we've looked at during these sessions, which you have been introduced to already, partly, I think most of them anyway. The university itself doesn't have a solely practical visual art course. So responding to the Barber's extraordinary collection practically has brought together students from various subjects, backgrounds, and levels of study and offered them a place to flex their creative muscles. Many of these students have not drawn or created art since school. And an amazing legacy of this club is how it's given several students the confidence to make art in their spare time and pleasure and to decompress, with one student saying, I never thought I was creative. I'm not very good at drawing, but I love these sessions. I love printmaking. Who knew? It's all well and good me talking about the power of Barber Print Club, but here's some more quotes from students. I have so much work to do with my PhD at the moment, but I just don't want to miss it. It's so relaxing and so calming. I wish the sessions were longer and I can't wait to learn more. Our collaborative artist partner, Laura Onions, has said, as a printmaker, it's been a huge privilege to be invited to facilitate the first year of Barber Print Club. Not only have I been able to work closely with Barber team and the collection, but the students too. Over the year, we've seen students return each month and with that, watch their confidence grow in handling materials and occupying a gallery space. For me, this has been the most rewarding aspect of the programme. I believe this work and the wider programme that the learning team creates enables students and visitors to see the Barber and the collection as a place for them, helping to shape and inform the development and future activities and decisions made within the Barber. In conclusion, the Barber Print Club has been successful in so many ways, and it's been an absolute pleasure to run and introduce people to the joy of printing over the past year. We can't wait to see how Barber Print Club evolves in the future as we delve deeper into the print collection that we're so lucky to have. Thank you so much for listening. And if you'd like to learn more about our engagement offer, ask questions, or see our public programme, please visit our website or feel free to message the Learning Engagement team on learning@barber.org.uk. And that's me.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. That was amazing. Could I invite all the panelists to turn on your video and microphones and come back and join us? Wonderful. What I found really fascinating this evening was the flow and the structure between the talks, and there's so many kind of overlaps that's happening between each aspect that you've shared with us this evening. So just waiting for some questions to come through in the chat, or if you want to send them through in the Q&A. We have a question from John Hinks, which is, could Robert please say a bit more about the German expressionist prints? Yes, which are in the Barber. They are a particular interest of his, and he's lucky enough to live near Leicester, where the City Art Gallery has a very strong collection of modern German art.
Yes, so the late Richard Verdi, who died last Christmas Day, sadly, was a passionate advocate of, I think, all things German music as well as art. And I think he felt it was an area that the Barber could collect in terms of works on paper, could get, as he succeeded in doing, a nice little group of them without huge expense, which would just be impossible with the equivalent in paintings, even if you get your hands on them, which don't appear on the market very often anyway. But with prints, there's a bit more scope. And he knew what he was talking about. He knew where to go. He knew what he wanted and what was needed for a collection of this sort. He had some friendly dealers like the late Robin Garton, for example, who sort of specialised in this area and were able to offer him prints. And even after Richard left the Barber Institute in the late 2000s, we continued acquiring a few more German expressionist works. In fact, Nicola Klinsky, who's the recently retired director, bought one only a few years ago. So it's an area, now we've got this sort of strong core of works, and there are also some drawings as well as prints. And now, in fact, we do have one or two paintings by German artists of this period. So it's become quite a strong body of work and something to sort of focus around. As John mentioned, there is a very good group at Leicester that came in some time ago now, and so that's an obvious partner for us to work with in the future, and there are some plans to do that, embryonic plans. So I think there are about, I don't know, 16 or 17, something like that, German expressionist works that we have, which handily fills one of our print bays. And we've had a number of examples of shows around that material, and often lent them as well, and they're quite often in demand. So I suppose by number, the most we have is by Cathy Kollwitz, who's an artist who whose work appeals to lots of people, but they're good examples by most of the major names in that area, I think. If that answers your question, John.
Thank you, Robert. It dovetails into something I wanted to ask you as well, which was in terms of, with the 30-year rule, do you find that could sometimes be problematic in terms of perhaps cost of acquisitions?
I think it was introduced by the trustees because Lady Barber had originally said there should be nothing later than 1900 in 1932. So that's roughly 30 years. And I think they felt, okay, we've got to represent 20th century art. This is a sort of teaching establishment. You can't just ignore it. But that 30-year rule is meant to provide a sort of safety zone, I suppose, that we wouldn't be buying sort of fly-by-night contemporary artists. They would have had 30 years to establish themselves as part of the canon, I suppose. I think that's the thinking behind it. So yes, it does mean that you're not going to get the young artists perhaps before they do become established and their prices take off, and that's an issue given that we've got a lot of ground to make up with our 20th century collections. However, with prints, obviously, there's a bit more scope. The money goes a bit further than with paintings, which clearly is our main business in terms of what we present to the public. But as Richard Verdi recognised, the works on paper collection is a good way of filling gaps, developing the collection, representing certain artists and movements and styles and so on, and issues without breaking the bank.
Excellent. We've only had a short period of time to touch down on the collections this evening, but if I could ask you all individually, what's a bit of a pop question for me really, but what would your individual favourite prints be in the collections, other than the elements we've discussed this evening? Do you have any personal favourites, or?
Well, for me, my favourite area is Dutch 17th century work, so it would probably be a Rembrandt. Although I do like that little Van der Velde, but it's a series of 4 seasons that showed you earlier. They're very beautiful. But I mean, it's actually very hard to choose, obviously.
Helen?
Yeah, definitely very hard to choose. I think in general for me, it's Turner. So we do have one of his watercolours of Ludlow Castle, as well as
Wonderful.
various prints. So yeah, it's another part of the collection not really touched on this evening.
Wonderful. Chloe?
Yeah, I'm just gonna load mine up. So my I'm just whizzing around on PowerPoint. Right, I've got it. I'll just share so you can see it properly. So mine is, I'm hoping you can see that. It's Agostino Carracci after Correggio, and this is a Correggio painting at the National Gallery. But the thing I love most about this etching is how the look of Christ directly towards the viewer, I think, is really captivating. But it's also on Christ's chest. You can see it's really shown up on more of a printed image. The cross on his sort of emblazoned on his chest, which I just think is beautiful. And it's an incredible detail, which actually you don't see in the painting. So that is my favourite.
Excellent. Sorry, you just lost me from one machine onto another then. But back with you. Thanks for sharing.
No problem.
And finally, Kirsty?
I think mine would have to be Kathy Kolowitz, mother with a dead child. Yeah, not the happiest one in the collection we've got, but Kathy Kolowitz has to be hands down my favourite. We've got a few of hers in the collection as well.
In terms of if we wanted to see some of the prints in your archives, how would we actually arrange that or book in an appointment? Do you take appointments from the public, or?
I'll hand you to Helen for that one.
Excellent.
Yes,
Thank you.
Definitely, yes. So we have a mixture of lots of different people, researchers, members of the public coming to view our works, as well as the art history department and other departments at the university using the space and looking at prints. So yes, you can email me or the collections team at the Barber, and you will get through to me and we can find an appointment time. So normally Tuesdays to Fridays during opening hours. Yeah, everyone's very welcome to come and view things that aren't on display.
Wonderful. And as you mentioned before as well, there's kind of dovetails between your collections and the Cadbury's Research Library also, which is some superb pieces. Okay, so I can't see any more questions coming through. So have you got any questions for each other in terms of your individual presentations?
I'd like to thank my fellow speakers. You did a brilliant job.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, wonderful talks from all of you. Thank you very much on behalf of HoPIN for your talks this evening. Okay, I think we can probably draw the event to a close this evening, but a huge thank you again for all our panelists and audience, and for the team at Wolverhampton for putting these sessions together for us. And we hope that you have time to pop across to Barber and view the displays in the cabinets and explore the collections. And I've got a personal plug as well, which is we'd like to invite everybody to come and see some contemporary printmaking at the Birmingham School of Art in Margaret Street for a private view on the 13th of June at 6 p.m. So thank you again to all the speakers. to CPHC, HoPIN and the team at Wolverhampton. Good evening.
Thanks, bye.